Hello, hello, and welcome to Animated GIF or GIF, however you pronounce it, workshop for art on the marquee. My name is Ryan Seslow, and I am an artist here in New York City, and I am here to show you how you can make some animated GIFs and submit them to the Art on the Marquee program. Much like you see on the screen here, we're going to work on creating some brief looping animations that can be applied into this space. So let's jump in. So I've got my desktop ready and a bunch of assets in a folder. And first thing I'm going to do is open Photoshop and just kind of read through some of the specifications here. Again, welcome. My name is Ryan Seslow. I'm an artist here in New York City. Let's make some animated GIFs or GIFs, however you'd like to pronounce it is up to you. The controversy continues and goes on. We're not going to debate that today. This is a special experimentation lab video created for the Patchogue Arts Council, MoCA L.I.ghts Fall 2020 programming, and is made in collaboration with the Patchogue Medford Library. MoCA L.I.ghts will be a series of compelling site-specific artist-designated light works to be exhibited in multiple locations throughout the downtown from October through December 2020. This video will show you how to create an animated GIF, which you can then submit for possible inclusion in the first Art on the Marquee exhibition at the Patchogue Theater for Performing Arts. October 3rd through December 21st, 2020, a rotating series of artist-created videos, GIFs, animation, and/or digitally created still works by up to 20 artists will be presented on the marquee of the Patchogue Theater. The presentation will begin at 8:20 p.m. 2020 military time and will be on view through midnight starting October 3rd and running through December 31st, 2020. Artists will be invited and submissions will be accepted through an international open call released in December of 2020. I'm just going to minimize this for a second and let's get us started again with taking a peek at the animation that I've got here hosted on the web. I've got the Chrome browser open right now, which is something I'm quite familiar with. Animated GIFs are completely codependent on a web browser in order to animate them. So by simply dragging this file into my browser is how I got this to play. Notice that I'm not in Photoshop right now or any other application other than Chrome. I created a folder here on my desktop, which has a focus on the title of the exhibition, Eyes on the Marquee, and I've got a couple of graphic assets in here and so forth. But one thing I just wanted to point out about the GIF file format, the extension, the .gif. If I hit Command T on my keyboard and I open a new web browser, notice that I can just drag the animated GIF file directly right into the browser without doing anything else. So anything in here that you see that I'm moving my mouse that has that .gif extension at the end of it is the one that I can pull and drag here. So I'll just pull this here and drag it. And there we go, it animates. Excuse me. One thing to keep in mind about this GIF file format is that if you double click on it, it doesn't work the same way. So if I do that, notice that what opens here is a series of still images. And the nice part about being able to see this is you'll get the idea that all we're really doing with the file format itself is creating a sequence of individual files that make up a stop motion sequence of changes that give the appearance that the animation is flowing. So if you notice, this can go on and on and on and on. This particular GIF that I created is about 15 seconds in length, and it's made for the purpose of the promotion of the show. So I've got 3 different animations that kind of flow through each other, but as you can see, these are all the individual frames that come together that make up the sequence that get brought into a stack. And I'm going to show you how to do that today. I think one popular format for animated GIFs is definitely the glitch aesthetic. And if you kind of watch the animation here, notice I've got a couple of things moving back and forth, but in between those sequences, there's this little flashing glitch that's occurring. And I'm going to jump right in, and you can use this technique and this process just to get the general idea of how this works. So let's jump into that, and let's take a look at another one of these that I created. So let's drag this one into our browser and take a look here. So what we basically see here is an animated GIF of an image that I've pretty much decimated with various textures and glitch aesthetic added to it. And there's a really fun and easy way to be able to do this. So, and then resize it, because you probably noticed from the image that our animations are going to have to fit into this aspect ratio here, which is, for the most part, pretty narrow and, longer than it is high, wider than it is high. And the aspect ratio for this is going to be 90 pixels high by 1080 pixels wide. And I'll share with you how you can do that and play around with a couple of ways in order to do that. So a couple things we're going to need. We're going to need to have access to an image or two that you may want to work with and use to create a fun sequence to create your glitch. And I'm going to double click on this here. And I've already got this prepared on my desktop. So this is just a digital collage that I made as an example, just so I can share this with you guys. It's made up with, it's made up from a bunch of different layers from graphic assets, all kind of consolidated and flattened using Photoshop. But I'm going to use this just as having an image on hand to kind of walk through this process. So I'll minimize that, and I'm gonna go ahead and just open Adobe Photoshop on my computer. I already have it open, but using, depending on whether you're using a Mac or a PC or whatever version that you have, for the most part, this technique should apply across all recent platforms of Adobe Photoshop, at least as far back as Photoshop from 2015. We'll be able to walk through the process that I'm doing. And even if you have an older version than that, it'll probably still work. But okay, so having Photoshop open, don't worry so much about the aspect ratio or the size ratio. We're going to come back to that in a second, but a couple things I'm going to do first. I'm going to open one document, a new document, and I'm going to hit Command N on my keyboard, or File and New, and you'll get the new document interface that pops up. And I'm going to go to and click on Web. And on the far right-hand side is where you'll see how I can make those adjustments and change my aspect ratio. On some computers, it defaults to inches. And if it is, just make sure you change it to pixels. And we're going to change that width to 1080. And we're going to change that height to, 90. Well, I did that a little bit too fast. So let's go back and try that again. 1080 by 90. And the resolution can be set for 72 because we're working on the web. Color mode RGB is fine because we're working on the web. And I'm going to change the background content to transparent. And everything else is pretty good in terms of what's default. So I'm just going to click Create. And you'll see that we get something that kind of looks like this. And using Command plus or minus on my keyboard, or on a PC, it's Control. Just using the plus and minus key lets me kind of zoom in and zoom out. I'm just in the habit of doing that. Also want to make sure that my layers panel is available. So you can find layers under Windows and just make sure that that kind of pops out. You can drag this out and push everything else back in, but we're going to kind of need this to get started. I'm not going to need artboards working with this animation. So just in case the artboards aspect of things pops up, you just go ahead and flatten that. Just so you don't have to worry about having a bunch of artboards. And if it flattens it and you lose the transparency, just double click on the background, remove that lock, and we're going to get rid of that background by selecting all, which is Command or Control and the letter A. And notice how those dotted lines appear and it highlights everything. And then Command X or Control X to remove everything that was in the background. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this because it can be reused again. And I can even call this 1080 by 90 blank canvas, just in case I want to go back in there and play with it and change the file name, but we're going to come back to that in a second. So I just want to alert you to the next part of this where we're going to just go to the web. And in order to create that glitch, just a cool website that I found a couple of years ago on GitHub that will allow us to upload an image and play around with some of their settings. So I'm going to just come to the web, and just by coming to Google, if I type in glitcher, one of the first things that will come up in this search is this cool website that says image glitch tool. And it's hosted on a website, called snorpy.github.io. But the image glitch tool is basically a web application that's free to use. And you can upload your image here and start playing around with their settings to create a series of sequences. So the idea is to upload your image and save 5 or 6 variations of it as it's been manipulated. And then we're going to load those sequences up into a stack in Photoshop. So let's go over here to the top left-hand corner, click open, and I'm going to import my file. And I've already got a folder, like I said, which is set on, eyes on the marquee, and I'm going to find my image in that folder, and I'm going to click open. And the cool part about this is you've got these little dials here at the bottom that you can play with, which controls the many different aspects of just the aesthetic itself. But just this in and of itself is a pretty cool way to get this glitch aesthetic, kind of going. So just by playing with that, and I can just kind of bring this down a little bit, I could just start saving my images one by one. Download image, and I'm just going to kind of drag them and leave them there underneath. And I can play with the controls again. And just repeat this sequence until I have a whole bunch that I like. But it's in this process that you'll be able to get the idea of what's actually happening here. So again, I am just making subtle changes, and these subtle changes will create a whole series of motion and movement that I think you'll find pretty cool. This, and in the bottom right-hand corner, there's also, and I don't like to get too codependent on it because I like to play around with moving the levers and dials myself. It's a button that says random. And if you hit this, you can just get a whole series of random versions of what's happening here as well. And this is just another way to generate a whole series of imagery. So now down here at the bottom of my screen, you'll notice I've got a whole bunch of different images. And again, this is coming from a website based on GitHub. It's a free web application that just creates cool glitch related aesthetic. And you can play with this as much as you would like, but I'm going to minimize that for now. And I'm just going to move my images around here, and it's saving them in PNG format, which is just an image-based file format that will open on pretty much any computer. But the nice part is I've got all these images, and I'm just going to kind of put them all in one place so I could find them easily as well. You notice the desktop of my computer is pretty cleaned up at this point. I'm used to just working with a lot of files and folders and organizing everything, because if you don't, it's just too time consuming. So let's go back to Photoshop for a second. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to open our timeline. So under Window, go down to where it says Timeline. And we're going to drag the timeline maybe down to the bottom, depending on where you're comfortable with it. But I'll leave that up to you guys. In some cases, it defaults down to the bottom on its own, but you can move things around as you like. And there's going to be two options when you open the timeline that you're probably going to notice. You have the option to create a video timeline, or if you click that little drop-down menu next to it, create a frame animation. And that's what we're going to be creating to get this kind of animated glitch-like aesthetic. And we're going to switch it, and then you actually have to click on the button. So that button's right here again. Just in case it's set for video, first you have to drop it down, and then actually click on the button itself, and your timeline will make an adjustment. So now we want to import our individual files here into Photoshop. So let's go to File. And this part can be a little bit tricky just because it involves a couple of steps. And it just takes a little bit of practice. So you could always come back and rewind the video and rewatch it again to get an impression of what's happening here. So I'm going to go down to File and Scripts and Load Files into Stack. So File down to Scripts and Load Files into Stack. I'm going to be prompted to browse. Where do I want to import that stack from? I'm going to click the Browse button. And I've got all my images already kind of saved on the desktop here. So just because I've identified them already, I can see that they're all here. I'm just going to hold the Shift key on my keyboard and activate all 6 of those items and click Open. And that will import the stack here into this little window. And all I have to do here is click OK. And after I click OK, you're going to notice that all 6 of those different files are now in my layers panel on the far right-hand side. And it's important that your layers panel is open as you do this, because the next thing that I'm going to need to do in order to move them, over here, and notice that I'm in a different window right now. Before I was over here. This is a different tab where I created that 1080 by 90. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. This one will show you a clever way to kind of bypass that at first, just in case you create something that you'd like to resize. So I'm going to come down to my timeline again and click on Create a Frame Animation. But in order to get all of these individual frames into the timeline, I need to click one. I'm going to highlight it, and then I'm going to hold Shift on the keyboard and click the bottom layer so that all of my layers are now highlighted. And on this little tiny menu in the bottom right-hand corner of the timeline, I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to select Make Frames from Layers. And that will bring all of those individual layers across over into the timeline. And notice now that I've got all these individual frames here, and the timeline interface is actually quite small. So there are little, parts of it that you just might need to, just kind of lean in a little closer on. But by default, and in order for this to animate and loop forever, you want to make sure that this setting in this first option is set to forever. And if you want to control the speed of each frame, you can do that by altering the speed in terms of their seconds. I'm going to set it for no delay because the glitch aesthetic, we pretty much just want that to flash quickly as if something is being decimated or if an image is being, played on a old computer or a television screen of some sort, and there's, an issue with the image that's playing. If I click the play button, there we go. We've got my image now appearing to be glitching and broken. And the next trick is going to be to save it. So first, let's just save it to go over the process of how. I'm going to go up to File, and I'm going to go down to Export and Save for Web. If I save this for the web, I will come up with another interface. And in this interface, I'm going to navigate up to this second drop-down menu, which will let me choose the file format, which has to be GIF. Once I switch that, I can take a peek at some of these other numbers here. And one thing that's important to kind of keep in mind is this is the size. So the size for this particular submission and for this exhibition is going to, we need to make sure that our file format stays under 5 megabytes. In my case, because I'm using kind of lower resolution PNG images that are all flattened, they're all pretty small. So in this case, I'm already way under my size rate, so I don't have to worry so much about that, but just pay attention to that number. You could always make some edits here with your numbers, but you'll also notice that my numbers here and the size are smaller than the 1080 width by 90, which I'm already way over with 906. But let's go ahead and save it anyway. And let's give it a name and a place where we can save it, so we can just give it a check. I'm just going to call this Ryan. I'm going to save it on the desktop so I can find it, and I'm going to click Save. I'm going to minimize Photoshop for a second. So we want to make sure that this is actually going to animate. There's my file down there. And remember, if we double click on it, it's just going to open an image viewing application that will show you all of the individual sequences that are a part of it, but it's not animating. In order for this to animate, we need to drag it or open the file in a web browser. So I'm just going to go here, and that's my previous one, but I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm just going to drag this into the browser. And there we go. So we can see that it's animating, and we've got no problem with that animating. A couple of tricks with this before we jump into the size. And I know that a lot of people are big fans of using applications like Instagram or TikTok or other platforms that allow you to upload video that can loop automatically, but most of those apps don't allow you to upload the GIF file format. So there are ways that you can save your files, in video format. So if you want to upload the video format version of it to an application like Instagram, all you need to do is convert it to a video timeline. And in the video timeline, you can render your animation in the timeline the same way, just by clicking this little render button. And this will allow for you to create a video version, which is MP4 by default, which is just another kind of quick little trick in the process of all of this. And I'll just give it the same file name. I don't really need to mess with any of these other specifications there, but it just takes a second, and I could always go back and reconvert it. But now, when I come back to the desktop, once that's done rendering, depending on where I sent it to, which I forgot. So if I click the render button again, just make sure you're aware of where you're sending it. So I sent it to the documents folder. So I'm going to come back here and do a quick search. documents, and I can just find that, drag it out of there. So there's my file. And that's the movie version of it. So you saw the animated GIF version. This is a video format version. If I double click on that, I'll be able to open this in an application like QuickTime. But just keep in mind that this GIF is only, about a second long. So if you wanted it to loop on any other platform like social media, you just have to make it a little bit longer. And the way that you can do that is just by duplicating your individual layers, and we'll get into that another time. So let's undo and switch back. Another way to extend this so that it's a little bit longer is that you could always duplicate your layers, and just by clicking one and holding shift and clicking the other one, notice that these settings here, we can always duplicate our frames and go on and on and on and on and on and on and on until we have enough frames that will make up, say, 2 to 3 seconds, so that if you did want to convert it into video, that wouldn't be a problem. Control or Command Z on the keyboard, and we can always go back a couple of steps. So what about resizing this now? Right now you can see that this animation is clearly a square, and that square is not going to fit into the specified aspect ratio of the exhibition, which says we want to be able to get our animation to fit into the marquee. So when it comes to the creation of this process, the size plays a role. So you'll notice here that I've got, a bunch of, different things happening here, moving multiple layers around and so forth in order for this to fit. But because I'm working with this glitch, I've got a lot of kind of freedom to play around with that. So one way that you can do that is if I go up to image and canvas size, I can change the size of the canvas to match the aspect ratio of the size of the marquee, which is asking us for 1080 by 90. And watch when I do that. It's going to say the new canvas size is smaller than the current canvas size, so some clipping will occur. That's okay. Let's see what happens. So now, if I go over to edit and I go down to where it says free transform, I have the opportunity now to kind of drag some point of my animated glitch, and just by pulling one of the corners, and if you have Photoshop 2019 or higher, you don't have to hold shift to keep it in proportion. But if you're using an older version of Photoshop, you'll have to use shift to keep it in proportion. And all I really want to do here is make it wide enough. And if I hit the return key to place it, and I hit command to just zoom in, I'll go back to my timeline and hit play. I've pretty much taken a portion of that glitch GIF that I made, and I just resized it using the free transform and canvas size tool, which makes it kind of easy, right? So I can go down to file and export and save for web. Make sure that my setting is here for GIF. Make sure that my size is correct, 1080 by 90, and that my file size is smaller than 5 megabytes, which it is. Now I'm going to hit the save button. And let's call this one maybe glitch 3. Save it on the desktop. Make sure the extension is GIF. Click save. I'm going to minimize Photoshop. And I'm going to locate my GIF. And I'm just going to, again, just drag it onto a browser to see. So now I've got the size correct, I've got the file format correct, and if I was to submit this to our hosts, I am quite certain that it would be the right size requirements to fit inside of the Marquee space that you see here, which is just super cool. I'm super excited to be a part of the show and to be able to see all of the awesome work that's going to come in. So let's just maybe check out another quick technique that will just give us the opportunity to work with a graphic asset and maybe move that asset frame by frame. So I'm going to minimize this again. And I'm going to double click on my folder because I'm just in a habit of doing this. And I'm just going to create a new folder inside. And it's just going to say maybe GIFs. Let's just kind of drag this into that folder just to get things organized. Now, what helps next is if you have some form of a graphic asset or something handy that you can work with in this space, that would really help in terms of how you would kind of build things up. And what I mean by that, a graphic asset can be any kind of image, an object that maybe you cut out, whether it was using the pen tool or using the magic wand tool that isolates it from a background of some kind. So if I hit Command and the letter O or open, and I come back to my folder, and I've got this one asset that I cut out from a different project, and I've got this handy here. I'm gonna see if I can activate it. Well, it looks like it's downloading still. But let me come back to the folder and try and access it from here. There we go. And if I double click on this, what you'll see here is I'm hitting the crop tool just to make this a little bit wider. This is a graphic asset. This is what you would call, it's just an old helmet from medieval times of a knight. I actually found it on the Metropolitan Museum of Art's digital collections archive that has a ton of open source images that you're free to go and use and cut up and play with and repurpose. So this is just one of those images that I spent some time working on. I kind of cut this out and notice that it's free for me to kind of do whatever I want with it. I can hit Command T and free transform it. I can resize it, or I can kind of rotate it and spin it and or make it spin. And just keep in mind, everything that you'd want to do is just kind of frame by frame. And every little movement is a frame. 2, frame. 3, 4. Anything that you want to do that will give the appearance of movement pretty much gets its own individual frame so that it can become a part of the sequence. So having this handy plays a role. Let's just say just in case you don't, and we're here in this blank canvas, let's build up some layers. Now again, I've already set the canvas size for 1080 by 90 in terms of pixels. So the size is already set, but now I can use my layers panel. I'm gonna go to create a new layer. And in the background layer here, which is blank, I'm gonna fill that in with a color. So I'm gonna hit Command A to select all, or Control A on a PC. I'm gonna double click this white background, excuse me, and I'm gonna hit this nice kind of orangey yellow color. I'm gonna click OK. I'm gonna go to Edit and down to Fill. And I'm gonna have the foreground color selected. I'm gonna click OK. I'm just gonna fill that area, make it this yellow orange color. And Command D to deselect. And with this other layer that I have here, I'm just gonna create a simple shape. So I have this idea that it can move. So in layer number 1, remember layer 0 is my background. I could turn that on and turn that off in the layers panel with that little eye. But you want to make sure that this is highlighted for where you're going to start performing something. And it doesn't matter if it's a shape or an asset like you saw before. And I'm just going to select maybe the elliptical. I'm going to pull a little circle. If you hold shift, it'll be a perfect circle. I'm going to double click on that again down there for color. And maybe we'll get this kind of fuchsia-like color. I'm going to go to edit and fill. Foreground color, click OK, and then Command or Control D to deselect it. If I zoom in a little bit, and to kind of move things around, you can switch back and forth. I just hit the letter H on the keyboard, which activates the hand tool, which allows for me to kind of zoom in. If I click the letter V on the keyboard, that's a shortcut to the move tool. And as long as my layer is selected, I've got this ability now to move this layer anywhere I want. But if I want to create the overall effect of something kind of moving, and in this case, let's just simply put, just for the sake of the understanding of how frame by frame animation can work, is if I want to start this off to give the impression that the ball moves from one side to the other, I can probably do this in about 6 or 7 individual frames and loop that. And just by showing this technique, I think it'll be helpful in order for you to start planning with other assets and other things you'd like to move into this field and move, that this would be a good little way that gets started. So the first thing we're going to need to do is let's turn this layer off. And let's just click on layer 0. And I'm going to File. And I'm going to go down to Save As. And I'm going to call this number 1. And I'm going to click Save. I'm going to leave the file format as Photoshop. And I don't really have to change anything else. I'm going to save it to the desktop so I can find it easy. I'm going to come back to layer 1, and I'm just going to simply turn it on. And my ball will be placed there. I'm also going to activate my rulers. So Command R. This way you can keep your object on the same plane if you want to. This will be helpful, just pulling one of those guides down. And I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm simply just going to call this number 2 and save. And then I'm going to start moving subtly. File, Save As, call it 3. And repeat this process, just moving it a couple of times until I get to the other side. And I'm just moving it subtly. And you have to remember the numbers. So just up the number 5. File, save, number 6, save, and repeat process. And notice that I'm trying to just move it, in increments of about the same amount of space. I'm just doing this visually, and just because I've been doing it for a while, I feel pretty confident with my technique. And I'm going to go here, save it again, layer number 9, and bring it to here. And this will be my final one. Save as, change that to 10. If I minimize this now, the bottom, come back here, I'll notice that there's a sequence of all of my individual frames. Number 1 through 10, placed on the desktop. It's easy to find. I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to go through that process again with my timeline. So I'm going to go to File and Scripts. Load file into stack. Browse. And there are my sequence of 10. And the reason why I use numbers like this is because it's just easy to find, and it's the first series of sequences that will show up. If you hold shift on the top one and the bottom one, it will highlight all of them all together. Click open. And at that point, I'll be able to hit browse. But notice every once in a while, Photoshop has this one glitch of it brings the numbers out of sequence So when you click OK, and you start to see all your individual layers popping up in the layers panel, just keep an eye on the sequence of numbers. You may have to drag your layers and change them. So I can just kind of see here, number 10 somehow got displaced. So you want to make sure that they're in sequence here. You could always revolve and remove them here in the timeline, but this is just a faster way to do it. So with the top layer being selected, I'm just going to move that guide out of the way, hold shift on the keyboard, select them all, come back down to your timeline and click the little menu in the corner, this little tiny menu here with the 3 lines, make frames from layers. And you'll notice now, when I click on it, you can see each individual frame has a stop motion. As it disappears, notice that it's actually going backwards. And if that's the case, you can click on the first layer, hold shift on the keyboard, select them all, go to the little menu again and click on reverse frames. So if I make sure that this is set for forever, it'll loop and play back forever. If I hit the play button, I get the impression that I'm moving this object from one side of the canvas to the other. If I hit stop. Now, if you want to slow this down a bit, you can. Hold first frame and the second frame, and once they're all highlighted, maybe I want to give it a 1 second delay. Notice that they all change at the same time. Hit play again, and it's a little bit slower, which kind of works. If you're happy with it, hit stop, and to save it again, we're going to go to File, Export, Save for Web. Make sure it's set for GIF. Make sure your image size is the one needed and that you're below 5 megabytes, which we are. Click Save. And we're just going to give it a name. We're going to save it on the desktop. We're just going to say Ball 2 as a GIF. Click Save, minimize. And I'm going to drag this into my browser to see that it's going to animate. And there we go. And that's just, 2 very simple techniques of moving an object, in the frame, frame by frame with just 10 simple frames to create an animation. Of course, you can get as crafty or, as complex as you would wish. Let's say, for example, we want to work with this asset, just because it's kind of interesting, right? And just so if I go and check the size on this, the image size on this asset is probably pretty big. Yeah, much bigger than what we need, but we could always reduce that and make it smaller. So let's just say, for example, I want to bring this into my, my field as well of what's already happening. So let's try it with, just by selecting it and copying it. So Command A or Control A on a PC, and Command C or Control C to copy. And let's come back over, to our original, and I'm just gonna kind of move this out of the way. And I'm just going to get rid of that, and I'm gonna paste in my little Knight's helmet. So Command V or Control V on a PC to paste. Oops. Come back and get that on the clipboard. Copy. And paste. Notice that it's way too big, right? Much bigger than this space. So maybe we want to make that a bit smaller. Or maybe just the overall idea of making this move. I'm just hitting Command T to free transform. if we wanted this to just simply pass through this way, it's just it's generally the same idea. It's going to be frame by frame, one at a time to move it. So let's start here again. And to make things easy on myself, I'm going to move all of this stuff, oops, into this folder so that I can just kind of rename things again the same way and not have to worry about that not showing up. Come to Photoshop, and I've got my layer here. And one kind of, depending on how much patience you have, ultimately, and I'm just hitting the arrow on my keyboard now, if I wanted to give this impression, you can see that I could stretch this out to probably 10 seconds and give it a floating frame by frame, which could probably equal up to 300 or 400 frames just to get it to move that way, but it's really not that necessary. So I'm just going to start with this again the same way I did last time by making frame number 1 just blank. Save as, I'm going to call this number 1, save on the desktop, and then just start inching up. File, save as, number 2. And I'm just using now the arrows on my keyboard and just changing those numbers as I go. And this will just give the impression that this helmet is just going to pass through the center of my frame here, which is very wide and narrow. And just repeating the process. So I've got a sequence. I think once you get an understanding of the frame by frame step, you're on the way to animating, much more complex situations and scenarios, which gets fun as well. Photoshop will be limited, as an animation tool, so there's only so much you're gonna be able to do with it before you're gonna have to make the jump to another application like After Effects. But the nice part is Photoshop and After Effects work synonymously together. All right, let's repeat the process. File, scripts, load files into a stack, browse, find my files, hold Shift, click Open, click OK, and watch them all appear in my layers panel. Just takes a second or two. And they're all in sequence, excuse me. And I'm just gonna select the top layer, hold Shift on the keyboard, select the bottom layer, little tiny menu in the timeline again, make frames from layers. And I'm gonna zoom in on this and just kind of maybe drag my layers panel out of the way and hit the play button. In this case, we can give the impression that it's falling out of the sky. Or if I hold Shift and select them all, I can reverse my frames so that it comes up. But if I want to slow the pace down, just hold Shift so that they're all selected at the same time. And maybe we give it a 1 second delay. Hit play. Now I've got the impression that we're moving. And I'm going to go to File and Export, Save for Web. Make sure I'm set for GIF. Make sure my image size is correct, 1080 by 90. and that I'm under 5 megabytes, which I am. Click save, and we're gonna call this my name 3. Just give it a different file name so that you don't have to have any conflicts. Minimize, locate it, and drag it on your browser to test. And that's a little introduction to creating some basic animations with a couple of little techniques. We look forward to the submissions that are coming. This little tutorial will give you the tools to get you started so that you could submit to the Art on the Marquee exhibition. Thank you guys so much for having me. My name is Ryan Seslow. This has been fun. Take care, everybody. Be well.